Hi, Jacob here with episode 5 of Poets and Depression. Um, Trying something a little bit different. I'm set up in my house instead of my car. I've got a new microphone that I bought, so I'm trying that out to see how that works. Also found a way to use my existing mirrorless camera. It's a Canon EOS R7, so I'm using that through a capture card through my laptop. So we'll see what the video is like, the new background. This will probably be changing. We are going to be moving and sometime in the summer to go up to Washington State. We live in Idaho currently, and it's just not working out for us well anymore. But so this episode is called "It Keeps You in the Basement." It's a poem I wrote fairly recently that's gotten some interesting feedback to it, and we'll just go ahead and kick things off. I'll go ahead and read through it, then we'll talk, we'll chat. So this is "It Keeps You in the Basement." I want to play. I see children through the glass, laughing with bright eyes and hair that blows in the imaginary fairy wind of riding dragons and unicorns that are really swings. The squeak, squeak of the chain against the bearing, a testament to use and disrepair, is music to me, because I have none in this basement where you keep me. It is the sound of human interaction, the pleasant touch of skin I've never felt. My cheek still stings from mother's love. I only tried to hug her, to ask her to let me play. The squeak is better than the jingling key that bolts my door with thunder. But you, still you, always you, forever you, the reason I'm kept a prisoner and yearn through barred glass windows at the bleakly green and gray of winter turning to spring. You are a shadow, always behind my eyes and never in front, afraid to be seen. The electric spark that raises hair, the soft phantom touch that burns and bruises. I want to play, to feel the grass beneath my feet instead of cold concrete and stone, to feel why the sun is yellow and burning and to breathe in the dust and swirl of wind. A distant bell vibrates through the glass, to my head pressed against its coolness, and the playground is as alone as I am. And how suddenly. The bell must be their key, the sound of their own harbinger. My hand mirrors my mother's, and my eyes sting. It is you who keeps me here. So this was an interesting poem for me. Um, I sat down to write it during one of my lunch breaks at work the other day, and it was a different experience. Like I had just talked about inspiration and the fear of managing depression and losing inspiration, because it's a very real fear that I have. It's a very real fear that I think a lot of people have, is as soon as you start managing your mental illness that you're not going to be who you are anymore. Especially for me, because I've dealt with depression for so long and basically my entire life that I don't know who I am without it, because I've always just not managed it very well and I've not really done anything. So I shared on Threads the other day this dark thought that I had, and it talked about um, being afraid that I was going to lose creativity, being afraid that as soon as I started managing my depression, I wasn't going to be able to write the way that I've been writing. I wasn't going to be able to share the things I've been sharing. I just started a podcast called Poets and Depression, and now what if I'm not depressed anymore? Well, the truth is that I'm always going to be depressed. I will always have depression. It's just a matter of how well I can manage it. Um, you might hear my dogs moving around a little bit here and there because we're inside. But so this idea that depression is the reason that I'm creative. Depression is the thing that gives me the ability to write, which is, well, frankly, bullshit. But it's hard to think that way when depression is all that you've had. It's all that you know. It's like a second skin. It's like a mask. It's like it defines who you are or what you are. And that's a challenge. It's tough. And to think about who you might be or what you might be without it or with it managed is kind of scary, because it's one of those things. It's like the comfort of the known. So I know depression, and so I find it comfortable. I don't know what managed depression is like, so I find that uncomfortable. It's like the heaven you don't know versus the hell that you do. Which one do you choose? Yep, you hear my little dog, my buddy, whining away because he can't get over to me because I'm in a corner. You're okay, bud. But so there's this idea that depression and mental illness defines us and it controls us and it makes us who we are. And that's really not true. Um, I know that in my core. I know that to be true. But it's hard to know something and then to know something, you know? Like, it's knowing that that's not really true, but the depression is going to tell you that it is. Like your anxiety is going to tell you that it is. Your OCD is going to tell you that it is. Your bipolar is going to tell you that's what it is. And it's really good at doing that. Mental illness is really good at lying to you and trying to convince you otherwise. And I had a lot of great responses. A lot of people really responded well and really reached out and talked to me about it, and I appreciate that. It was really the point of why I posted that in the first place, was to share my thoughts and to get discussion going and to hear what other people talk about, what other people think, and how they realize what might be going on in their own lives and what they've dealt with. And by and large, the people that responded were people that were dealing with depression themselves or some other type of mental illness, and they've been managing it and they've been working through it, and they've kind of come out on the other side. And they realized that it didn't change who they were. Well, it did, but it made them better. Okay, it didn't really change who they were, it released them to be who they are, is I guess a more apt way of looking at that. Like, depression is actually a crutch. It's a it's a thing that holds you back even as much as it doesn't pretend like it does. It's like I've always heard the idea of like the suffering artist, or like, oh, I'm at my most creative when I'm depressed, and because I get my ideas from my depression, it's the darkness and the stuff like that. And there's a bit of that is true, obviously. Like, I don't know how it couldn't be true, but to have that be really the only thing that is true, I just don't buy that. I don't know how I could buy that. And depression makes it so that you want to, because it is comfortable, because it is it's the darkness that you know versus the light that you don't. But so I've been starting to manage my depression. I'm on medication that seems to be working. I think I've talked about this before. It's Rexulti. It's an antipsychotic. It's a mood stabilizer. I'm on the highest dose allowed for depression. I'm also taking in conjunction with Wellbutrin, largely for insurance purposes, because you have to be on an antidepressant in order to take these other medications for treatment-resistant depression. And it seems to be working. Like, I've noticed that I've fallen towards some depressive cycles, but I haven't actually fallen into the depressive cycle. I still have bad days. I'm going to have bad days. That's just how it is. Like, everybody has bad days. But they've been less bad. I've been able to kind of catch myself and realize what's happening. I've been able to pull myself out of it. Actually, my wife and I went for a walk today. We haven't done that in a very long time, because my depression won't let me. Her anxiety won't let her. But today was a nicer day, and we realized we needed to, and so we did. And that's why I'm recording a podcast right now. It's 5 o'clock in the evening, and I've been thinking about this all day. And it was getting really easy to think, oh, I can just put that off. I can just do that another time. I don't have a podcast coming out this week. I'm recording this early because I'm doing a bi-weekly, so every other Thursday release. But I still wanted to get it done. I still wanted to record. I still felt that drive, and I might as well use that while I have it, and so I did. And I wanted to talk about this poem while it was still fresh in my mind because I just wrote it. And that's where a lot of this comes from, is this thought and this idea that as soon as my depression is managed, I'm not going to be who I am anymore. I will be less creative. And by and large, the responses that I had, the people that responded and talked to me and shared their own journey and their own life with mental illness and managing mental illness, they came out the other side better. They came out more creative. The amount of people that told me that they were the most creative that they've ever been, it felt like they had been like unveiled. They'd been uncorked, like, excuse me, like they were finally free to be who they were as a writer, as an artist, as a creative, and that's encouraging. That's hopeful. And so I hope for people that are artists, that have depression, that have mental illness, that have anxiety, that you can hear that and you can know that there is another side, and it is a better side. Depression isn't all that there is. Anxiety isn't all that there is. There's so much more to it. There's life. There's art. There's family. There's friends. There's pets. There's dogs. There's cats. There's a whole bunch out there that makes life worthwhile. And I just realized you can hear my dishwasher in the background. Anyway, Something I had talked about at therapy, and something I had talked about at Threads a little bit too, was this idea of like atheism and spirituality. One of my friends on Threads shared about how she was looking for um, like her God because she couldn't feel his presence anymore. And so I talked about when I found out I was an atheist and how I found out I was an atheist. And it's because the God of my religion that I was a part of, I didn't feel the love that that God was supposed to give. I didn't feel the love that was recognized and that was supposed to be. And I've felt that for a very long time. Like, I realized I was an atheist later in life, but after I realized that I was one, I realized how long I had actually been an atheist, if that makes any sense. Like, I finally knew what the word was, and I knew what went into it. And so I was finally able to be like, oh, I've been that from a very young age. I just didn't know it. And that all ties into this too, like this idea of that that you can't be spiritual if you're an atheist. You have to have gods to be spiritual. And I think that's a bunch of bullshit too. Like, I am spiritual, but my spirituality is different than somebody that believes in a god or believes in Jesus, or believes in a different religion, whatever religion that might be, even witchcraft. But my spirituality is humanity. My spirituality is the existence of the galaxy and the universe that we exist in. Like, to quote Tim Minchin, or to paraphrase him at least, like, how is this not enough? How is this one life not enough? How is what's out there not enough? Like, just the scope of nature, the scope of the universe and the galaxy and everything that we can and cannot see, the scope of what we do and do not know about our own planet. How is that not enough? Like, why does there have to be anything else? And don't get me wrong, I have nothing against anybody that believes otherwise, or that believes in a god or believes in a religion. Like, I have nothing wrong with that. Everybody, to each their own. Like, no judgment, and I sincerely mean that. I just know that atheism was right for me. I know that I don't believe in God or in any gods, and that's fine. But I'm not going to fault somebody for needing to believe in a god or wanting to believe in a god. Like, that, that just doesn't make sense to me. Like, I believe in humanity, and by and large, humankind shows far more propensity for good than they do bad, even though there's a lot of bad out there, and there certainly is. But for every bit of bad, there's a whole heap load of good, and you can see that in art. You can see that in nature. You can see that in how people treat other people. You can see how in times of distress and disaster, how people come together and take care of each other. Like, it's impressive, it's amazing, it's magical. And so all this has been circling in my mind for a while, which is why I really wanted to record this podcast today, even though it is early, because it's fresh and it's there and it's important, and it all kind of ties in together. And so this idea that my mental illness would make me less creative if I managed it. The idea that spirituality and believing in God are mutually exclusive. Like, you can be spiritual without being religious. You can be religious without being spiritual. You can be spiritual without believing in a God. You can be spiritual with believing in a God. That all goes hand in hand. It all ties together, and I think a lot of it ties into our mental health as well, because we get what we need. When you're looking for something, when you're looking for an answer, when you're looking for a God, when you're looking for not a God, when you're looking for a reason to live, you're always going to find an answer. You're going to find the answer that you need. It might not be the answer that you want sometimes, but you will always find the answer that you need. And for me, that was not believing in a God, and that was accepting that humanity in itself is incredible and beautiful and amazing. And even with all the darkness that's out there, the darkness that I even write about, there's more to it than that. Because this poem that I wrote, It Keeps Me in the Basement, it is a darker poem. There's some definite undertones there. I remember telling my therapist when I had her read it that it wasn't necessarily autobiographical, but it's because I read something in it differently than she did. Like the part where my cheek still stings from mother's love. I only tried to hug her to ask her to let me play. When I wrote that, I was thinking of a physical slap, like physical abuse. I was never physically abused. But she read that in a different way, knowing my history and the neglect that I kind of dealt with in growing up kind of by myself, even though I had parents around. My dad always worked, and my mom didn't do a whole lot. She was busy with the divorce hit her differently, let's just say. So I kind of grew up with myself because my brother was 8 years older than I am. The time the divorce happened, he dissolved into drugs and drug addiction and drug abuse and left the house, lived on with his friends and stuff like that. So like I was essentially alone, and I was kind of responsible for myself. Now, granted, my parents had a roof over my head, they clothed me, they fed me, that kind of thing like that. But it wasn't really a yeah. But so I read when I wrote that part as more physical abuse, whereas my therapist read it more as like my cheek still stings. Like your cheek can sting from crying, it can sting from pain, it can sting from other things, and not necessarily physical violence. And as I was explaining this poem to her more and more, she was like, you told me this wasn't autobiographical, but I see so much of you in this. And that's fair, because there is a lot of me that is in this poem. The whole premise of it is it keeps you in the basement. Your depression, your anxiety, your mental illness is going to do whatever it can to lock you in this basement and keep you away from everything. It's going to have that key that's going to keep you away. It's going to do everything it can to prevent you from living life. And a lot of times it's going to succeed. It will succeed if you don't manage it, if you don't get help. It did that to me for a very long time. Some days it still does. I'm still fairly new in this journey, you know. But, and so that's where, as this goes on, like, but you, still you, always you, forever you, the reason I'm kept a prisoner, it's depression, it's my mental illness, it's what's holding me back. And so, and then, like, it's always there, but it's hard to see, you can't really see it. You are a shadow, always behind my eyes and never in front, afraid to be seen, the electric spark that raises hair, the soft phantom touch that burns and bruises. It's how it feels, because you can't see it, but you know it's there. And even though you can't see it, it still controls you. It still drives you. It still fills you with fear of things that that you don't know you should be afraid of, that you shouldn't be afraid of. Like managing my mental illness should not make me a worse person. It shouldn't, and it won't. I know that it won't. Other people know that it won't. Other people are proof that it won't. But that's the lie that it tells. It's always the lie that it tells. So this is starting to get a little dark, I guess. But I mean, that's the root of all this, and this poem is a dark poem. It's not necessarily a happy poem. It ends with, "It is you who keeps me here." Like, I mean, there's no change in this poem. The person is still stuck in the basement. I'm still stuck in the basement. Now, that's not how I am. That's not what I am. But the interesting thing about this poem, and that's what I was kind of alluding to at the beginning of this video and this podcast, is that when I sat down to write it, I didn't really have anything in mind what I was going to write. It's one of the first times that I've done that in a long time. And so this tied into this whole idea, this whole conversation that we just had about depression and changing who you are and creativity and atheism and spirituality, and how it's all connected and how all this ties together in mental health and well-being and being in touch with your fellow man. Because like having this conversation with other people helped, because they were able to say, "Hey, I've been where you're at, I've made it through, the other side is fucking amazing, you're going to be the most creative you've ever been in your life, trust me." And this poem is pretty evident of that, because when I sat down to write it, I didn't really have anything in mind. I sat down, thought about, okay, what can I write about? Let's think about this. You know, you start doing I'm just going to start writing until I write kind of thing. I didn't even get to that point. I randomly had it keeps you in the basement pop into my head, because I was thinking about depression, about the conversation I had the other day on Threads, about depression wearing you, about depression controlling you and depression driving you. And this poem came into existence. I mean, yes, it's more than just that. I have to write it, I have to edit, I have to look about it and think about it, that kind of thing. And I do that as I write, and after I write, and I read through it. But that's the difference. Like, you know how long it's been since I've had a poem that I didn't have to really work for? It was a really long time. I know that's not always going to happen, but it's interesting that it did. And it just, The timing of it was too good not to talk about, too good not to share. And I think it was important to share because I think that's going to be a question that a lot of people have when they're dealing with depression and mental illness is, what am I without it? What am I with it managed? What am I when I don't have this thing controlling me that's been controlling my entire life? And even though I'm not fully there yet, I can tell you, just like people told me, it's better. It's better. And on that note, I think that's a great place to end. And we will see you again later. Thank you for stopping by and listening and watching. And I hope you guys have a great week and great weekend. Bye.